The bill that is the subject of this motion, however, Mr Speaker, has seen the Senate very sensibly extract 4 elements from the government's very lengthy omnibus legislation and propose that those 4 pieces be dealt with today. And the omnibus legislation, as we know, Mr Speaker, provides a whole series of controversial measures that the government knew that the opposition was never going to support, but wrapped into that are also various measures that we do support.
The question is the amendment be agreed to, and give the call to the member for Hughes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I rise to support this motion brought by the Manager of Opposition Business. Mr Speaker, this motion proposes that we in this House now debate the private senator's bill, which has today come down from the other place. And the bill in general concerns the government's very large omnibus legislation dealing with Fair Work. The bill that is the subject of this motion, however, Mr Speaker, has seen the Senate very sensibly extract 4 elements from the government's very lengthy omnibus legislation and propose that those 4 pieces be dealt with today. And the omnibus legislation, as we know, Mr Speaker, provides a whole series of controversial measures that the government knew that the opposition was never going to support, but wrapped into that are also various measures that we do support. And so I commend the motion brought by the Manager of Opposition Business, because those 4 elements that the private senator's bill has sought to extract are 4 elements that we on this side support. We support this for workers' protection, and in particular, also we note that small business and the business community generally also supports these proposed amendments. And they go to 4 separate issues. First of all, supporting first responders to cope with PTSD. Secondly, it relates to changes specifically related to people who are suffering from silica diseases that have been caused in the workplace. Thirdly, it also it supports those in the workplace who have been the victims of domestic violence. And these are all very important measures, Mr Speaker, that we do support. And I would consider, because that means, and in view of the comments that have been made for the Minister for Industrial Relations when this legislation was first brought before the House, I would imagine that that those on the government side will also be supporting this motion. They have said over and over again how important it is that workers' rights are protected, and the private senator's bill will, if passed today, and it can be passed today, will ensure that those workers' rights are protected. And if we can just go back through a bit of the history of this matter, Speaker. At the time of introducing the bill, the Minister for Industrial Relations said the House needed to stop delaying because we on this side, apparently, were imperiling the safety of Australian workers. So, Mr Speaker, my question is this. Will the government today apply that same test? Will it stop imperiling the safety of Australian workers and agree, both with this motion and also with the legislation? Because to not support this motion would in fact be a betrayal of Australian workers, and that's on the government's own test. That's on the minister's own test. And it would be betrayal of those people, the very people that those opposite claim to always support. And, Mr Speaker, procedurally, this motion is correct. It is entirely appropriate for the House to determine what matters it considers most important to debate and when to debate them. Given the messages from the Senate contain provisions which would inarguably enhance workers' safety, this is an opportunity to immediately pass these common-sense provisions. And it doesn't matter, there'll be an argument put that these provisions also exist in the government's omnibus Fair Work Amendment Bill, but these provisions when the whole bill comes back before the House, those provisions can easily be omitted during the consideration in detail stage if the government wishes. So, Mr Speaker, the House must deal with what is currently before it. That's the Private Senator's Bill. Private Senator's Bill that we agree would help Australian workers. The government cannot claim that this motion somehow ambushes the government and decreases their time to consider the Private Senator's Bill. These bills aren't a surprise. There's already been a vote on them in the Senate, so the government has in fact formed a view on them. And I do congratulate both Senators Pocock and Lambie on doing the hard work to get these provisions through the Senate. And I do note, though, that the government did vote against the passage of those bills when they were in the other place. And, Mr Speaker, I think it might be useful when we consider what the government is proposing to do today to look specifically at some of the rhetoric that was expressed when the omnibus legislation first came into this place. The Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations said, "Members on the government benches are ready to have this debate. We're ready to have this argument. We're ready to close the loopholes." Well, Mr Speaker, we on this side of the House are today ready to have this debate. The Assistant Minister for Mental Health and Suicide Prevention said, "That is why I am so pleased to see that in this proposal, first responders will have better support for mental health that has arisen due to their work." Again, we are prepared to have that debate today, and we are prepared to support those measures today. The member for Canberra. Those opposite will moan about unions and whine about processes, but just remember what they're really worried about. They're really concerned about workers getting a fair go. Well, again, Mr Speaker, we are also concerned about workers getting a fair go, and we are here today to demonstrate our concern and to vote on that concern to ensure that workers do get a fair go. The member for Corangamite said, "Safe and fair working conditions are one of the foundations of our Australian working life. These conditions give workers and their families a sense of security, hope for the future, and the basis on which to build a productive and meaningful life." I would assume, based on that sentiment, that the member for Corangamite will be voting in favour of the motion today. The Assistant Minister for Social Services said, "Very importantly, this legislation makes it unlawful to discriminate against an employee that has been or continues to be subjected to family and domestic violence." And again, Mr Speaker, I would imagine that the Assistant Minister for Social Services will be similarly supporting both the motion, similarly supporting this motion today. So, to conclude, Mr Speaker, this is a sensible motion. It provides an opportunity for the government to demonstrate that it does truly support the safety of workers in Australia by voting for this motion to bring the Private Senator's Bill forward and for the sensible provisions of the government's Omnibus Fair Work Amendment Bill to pass, and that could pass today, Mr Speaker. Thank you.